Hey guys, how you going? So in today's video I'll be showing you how to create a color palette using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So the reason why you might want to have something like this is if you have several different projects going on at once. Of course, each project is going to have its own set of colors that are used for the design. So having something like this can help you organize your colors, and it's also very easy to just click on a color. It's going to select it all. You can of course then copy and paste into whatever you want. For example, I use this for decode when designing thumbnails or videos and things like that. So this tutorial is going to cover different aspects of front-end web development. Particularly, we're going to be using CSS Grid, and on the JavaScript side, we're going to be doing some DOM manipulation, so creating elements, appending elements, things like that, as well as using JS docs. So chances are you might learn something in this video that you may didn't already know. But anyway, let's go inside this tab right here. We're going to start from scratch. So inside the text editor, we can see I've got this index.html file, which of course is currently just an HTML skeleton. So firstly, I want to create a new directory called source. Inside here, we're going to have the CSS and the JS files for this mini project. So we're going to say main.css and then of course main.js. We can include these inside the head. So link for CSS at source and then main.css, then down here script source at of course source and then main.js. So now we are ready to of course start creating the color palette. So firstly, we're going to be working on the HTML structure before moving on to the CSS and then finally doing the JavaScript. So firstly, inside the body, let's create a new element, and this one right here is going to be the main container for each one of those individual color items. So we can say here a new div with a class of palette. Okay, cool. So now inside the main.css, we're just going to firstly just target the body, and we're going to be setting the margin to be 15px, and down the road a bit later on we're going to be setting the grid gap, so the gap between each one of those items to also be 15px. That way it's going to be nice and consistent with the borders around the page. We're going to also go down here and we're going to say palette, so targeting the main palette container, as well as every single element inside the palette container. We're going to be saying box sizing and setting this to border box. Now this is kind of cheap, but there's going to be several times where I want to use box sizing border box, and it's just easier to set it globally within the palette container. And lastly, for the palette container class, we're going to just target it individually, and for this we're going to say font family. We're going to be setting it to be sans serif. Then we're going to say display, and we're going to be setting this to of course grid, and then we're going to say gap, and we're going to make this 15px, so basically using the same px value as the margin on the body for consistency. And then down here we're going to be saying grid template columns, and we're going to say repeat, and we're going to say auto-fit. Then we're going to say min max, and we're going to be putting 200px inside here, as well as 1fr. And I'll show you how this works a bit later on, but for now let's just go back inside the index.html and just continue with the next part of the HTML structure, and that is going to be each one of those individual palette items. So let's go inside the web browser real quick and take a look at the previous example. As we can see, each one of these colors, these 8 color items, is what I call a palette item. Okay, so let's go back inside here, and we're going to be creating a new div with a class of palette underscore underscore item to represent a single item. Okay, and then within here we're going to make a new div with a class of palette underscore underscore color, and this right here is basically going to be the main color div, which shows the actual color visually. So this big square right here. Within this one, we're going to be setting or creating a new element called palette underscore underscore desk or description, and this right here is going to be the text which floats above the color. For example, decode primary. Okay, and then lastly for this section, we're going to make a new element an input field with a class of palette underscore underscore input, and then for the value, we can set this to be, for example, the decode green color. So back inside here, let's just copy this and then of course paste it inside here. So now let's just save this along with these CSS changes and then refresh, and as we can see, we get something like this. So let's inspect the div here. As we can see, the grid is working perfectly fine. However, to actually see the changes that were made, we're going to go back inside here and we're going to be duplicating the palette item div a few more times. Okay, let's try it again and refresh, and as we can see, the grid is working beautifully. Okay, so what did this property do right here? Well, basically it's just saying that we're going to try and fit as many of those items, so each one of these items right here, we're going to fit as many as we can within the container, and if there is room for an item of 200px width, then it's going to insert that on that first row or on each row, if that makes sense. So let's go back inside here in the demonstration, and as we can see, if I was to resize this window, they sort of flow down nicely, but if there is 200 pixels of room, then it's going to be inserting that particular item on the horizontal axis or axis, okay? Something like that, right? So we can see it's working perfectly fine. We have each one of our items flowing really nicely, okay? Cool. So now let's move on to styling up each one of these palette items. So back inside here, let's target the palette underscore underscore color class. So of course that big box of color. And for this, we're going to say height, and we're going to be hard coding this to be 150 pixels. Okay, so I find 150 pixels is a decent height, and it helps, of course, show off the color, but also it's not too high. Okay, we're going to say background, and we're going to be setting this to red just for demonstration purposes. Okay, we're going to also say position, and we're going to make this relative. And the reason for this relative is so that we can absolutely position the text that is just below here, the description. But we'll move on to that a bit later on. Let's just save this here and then refresh. As we can see, we get something like this. So now let's move on to styling up the description, and of course making use of this position relative property. So we're going to be targeting the palette underscore underscore desk class. And for this one, we're going to be setting some padding. We're going to say padding, and we're going to make this 10 pixels. We're going to also say here, of course, position absolute. Okay, we're going to say left 0 and then bottom 0. This ensures that, of course, it gets positioned in the bottom left corner of this element right here. Okay, let's just save this and refresh, and we can see we get this right here. It is now positioned nicely. Okay, let's go back inside here now, and we're going to be setting a width of 100% for that element. Okay, we're going to also say background. We're going to set the background to be a 40% opaque black. So we're going to say RGBA 000, of course, for black. Then we're going to say 0.4 for a 40% opacity. We're going to also say color, and we're going to set this to be white. That way the text is going to be white. So now saving this and refreshing gives us this right here. And of course, that 40% black background is going to help show the color, of course, behind the text, but also make sure that the text is still legible. Okay, cool. And that is all for the color description. We can move on to the last bit of CSS, and that is going to be styling, of course, the actual input field. So we're going to say palette underscore underscore input, and for this one we're going to say width and make this 100%. We're going to set the padding to be 10px, the same that was used for the description just up here. We're going to say border and set this to none, as well as a outline of none, and the outline none basically just removes the default blue outline when focusing on the input field. We're going to also say border top, just border 1px solid, and then just a light gray. I believe I can get rid of this one, to be honest. that must have been there from earlier. But anyway, let's put border and make this a light gray around the edges. Then we're going to say border top, and we're going to set this to be none. Okay, so of course just say left, bottom, and right border. So now saving this and refreshing gives us this right here, and we are ready to move on to the JavaScript to populate each one of these colors. So let's go inside here. I'm going to firstly just remove the background property that was set on the color, because we're going to be setting that using JavaScript instead. Of course, you may want to have some sort of like default color, for example like dark gray as a default, but it's up to you. I'm going to be removing the background color on the actual color element. So anyway, let's go inside the HTML and just remove each one of these items inside here, because we're going to be generating them using JavaScript instead. Okay, so now we're just left with the palette container. Okay. By the way, we are going to be selecting this element right here in the JavaScript to actually use. However, you may want to instead just generate this element also using JavaScript. It's totally up to you. But for me, I'm going to keep it right here. Anyway, let's go inside the JavaScript, and firstly, what I want to do is I want to create a few functions to help us out. So firstly, I'm going to be creating a function, and this function is going to be called createElementWithClass. So basically, it's going to allow us to create an HTML element and then also set the class attribute on that element. So of course, it's going to be useful when creating each one of these individual divs for the color palette. So for this one, we're going to be taking in a tag name, so things like div, image, etc., and also a classes attribute containing a space separated list of classes. Inside here, we're going to say const L equal to document.createElement. We're going to say right here, of course, tag name, passing that in to create that element with that tag. We're going to also say L.setAttribute, and we're going to be setting this to be, of course, class equal to the value of classes that you pass in. We're now going to return the actual HTML element, okay? And then we're going to be using some JSDoc to document this function. So we're going to say / ****. If you're using VS Code, it's going to automatically generate this for you. So inside here, we're going to say param. The first param, the tag name, is going to be a string. The second one is of course also going to be a string. And for this, we're going to say for description, the tag name of the element in brackets, for example, div, image, etc. Okay. Then down here, we're going to say sets the class attribute multiple separated by a space. Okay. Then up here for the description, we're going to simply say creates an element based on the tag name and classes given. Okay. And then for the return type, we're going to say returns, and we're going to say right here HTML element. So that is some JSDoc documentation. If you don't use JSDoc, I highly recommend you use it, especially if you're using a text editor such as VS Code, because now if I was to create a variable or a constant from this function, VS Code is going to know that it's going to return an HTML element and give us suggestions for properties and methods. But anyway, that is our function to create HTML elements. Let's just go back inside the web browser and then refresh, go inside the console, and then try to use this function. So for example, we can say create element with class, we can say div, then we can say, for example, let's say palette __ color. Pressing enter now gives us this div right here. Okay, cool. That function is done. Let's move on to a second function, and the second function is going to be probably the main one, and this function is going to create a whole structure for each one of our items. So this one is going to be called, of course, function create item. We're going to pass in here a color and also a description. So basically your color is going to be your hexadecimal representation, you know, #000 or whatever, and your desc is going to be the description of the color, for example, decode primary. Okay, let's do some documentation real quickly here. So the color is going to be a string, and the description is also going to be a string for the color. We're just going to say, let's just say the value of the color. So this technically can probably be RGB color or hex. I'm not sure what actually matters, but we can just say the value of the color. For the description, we're just going to say the description, just name/use of the color. Okay. For the function description, we're going to say creates a palette item based on the given color information. Okay, really straightforward. And for the return property, we're going to say, return documentation, we're going to say HTML element, once again, same as this one up here. So now, inside this create item function, we're going to firstly create each one of our HTML elements. So we're going to be creating one for the main container, the color, description, and the input field. So we can say const elm, we can say elm item equal to create element with class, a div with a class of palette underscore underscore item, and do the same thing 3 more times. This one here is going to be elm color with a class of palette underscore underscore color, also a div. Elm description, okay, also a div with a class of palette underscore underscore desk, and this one right here is going to be the input field. And for this one, we're going to be saying, of course, create an input with a class of palette underscore underscore and then input. Okay, so now it's very straightforward. For the item, we're going to leave that as is. But for the elm color, we're going to be saying elm color.style.background color. So setting that background color to be the color which you pass in. Like I said, this is probably going to work if you pass in a string of, like, for example, red, or you pass in the hexadecimal representation, or even the RGB. It all should still work. Okay, we're going to say here also elm input.value equal to, once again, also the color. So of course that is the input field color, and also elm description.text content equal to desk to, of course, show the actual color name. Okay, and then finally we can just say elm item, so the main container, we can append child the elm color element, and for the elm color, we're going to be appending the elm description. Okay, so to, of course, put the description inside the color to show it in the bottom left corner. And then finally we can say elm color, sorry, my mistake, elm item.append child, and we're going to be appending the actual input field. Okay, so I might just reorder this. So we are, of course, appending the color and the input field to the main container, then of course the description to the color. Okay, and that right there is going to create the HTML structure. But finally, I do want to say here, I want to say elm input.onFocus equal to a function, and this function is going to say elm input.select. So basically, when you click or you gain focus on an input field, it's going to select all of it automatically, and that's basically what happens when I click on an input field, just like that. Okay, and lastly here, let's just return the main container, and of course we're going to be calling this function several times depending on how many colors we have. So now let's just save this here and refresh the browser and then try and use that function. So we're going to say create item, going to pass in, for example, my decode green color right here. Okay, then we're going to say decode primary, press enter, and we get this right here. That's not right. Let's go back inside here and actually return the item. Let's try again, save this, refresh, and create once again, and now we get the main div, the palette item. We have the structure here. As we can see, the color and the input was appended to the main item, and of course inside here we have the description and of course the input and also the background color has been set on the palette color element. So now it's simply just about getting each one of our colors and then looping over them and then displaying them on the page. So in order for this to work, we're going to be using a JSON file which contains each one of our colors. So let's make a new directory here called data. Then inside here we can make a new file called, let's just say decode.json to contain each one of the decode colors. Okay, I'm just going to copy and paste what I've got here on my second screen. So copy this and paste it inside here. This JSON file now contains an array as a root element, and each object here is each one of those colors. As we can see, we have a desk and a color property for each object, and it's really straightforward. It's simply just the description and the color for each one of our colors. Okay, cool. So now let's go back inside the JS, and we're going to be doing a fetch request to of course the JSON file. But first let's just get a reference to the main container, this one right here. Okay, so for this I'm going to say const palettes container equal to document.query selector. I'm going to pass in here a class of palettes. Okay, and then down here we can simply say fetch. We're going to be fetching from the URL data/decode.json. Okay, and then we're going to say simply, of course, .then, and we're going to get the response, and we're going to be returning response.json. So basically we're going to be making a request to this JSON file, and then using the .json method we're going to be converting this into a native JavaScript object to parse that JSON. And then we're going to say .then, we're going to have the actual data right here, so we can just say color list, and inside here of course our color list refers to an array of these objects right here. So we can simply just say for and then const, and then using object destructuring, I'm going to pass in here inside these curly braces, we're going to say desk and then color, and then we're going to say of color list. So basically it's going to loop through each one of these objects, and using object destructuring it's going to be setting a desk and a color constant with a value of what they correspond to here. So make sure that your desk and your color right here are the same spelling as what you use inside your JSON file, desk and color right here. Okay, and then we can simply just say right here palette container dot append child. Okay, I'm going to pass in here create item, and pass in here of course color and then description. Okay, and just for reference I'll just console.log desk and then color for each iteration of the loop. Okay, let's save this here and then refresh the browser. As we can see, it's working perfectly fine. In the console we get each one of our descriptions, then our colors, and we can see how that gets fetched from the JSON file. So as we can see here, that's basically just the mini project right there, and you can of course expand on this quite easily. Maybe you want to have some sort of thing where you save JSON files to local storage, so you can actually choose them later on. I might even do a video doing that to expand this color palette, but that's basically how to create a color palette using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.